I make videos for a living, some of which are a part of this channel, and some of which end up other places. Now, the most important phase of video production is actually its pre-production, the idea, development, and process behind how I make my videos before I even start filming and long before I even start editing. Now, I think the most important piece of that is writing. Reading, note-taking, and writing. And I want to walk you through in detail how the Apple Vision Pro's ultra-wide monitor in beta right now is already changing my workflow when it comes to my pre-production process. And in doing so, I want to walk you through 2 apps, 1 big idea, and then a little bit of an epilogue in how this change to the Apple Vision Pro is unlocking new ways for the most important step of my main work, which is that idea development. The 2 applications that I'm going to walk you through today are Obsidian, where I take my notes, organize my ideas, and make new connections in the pre-production process after reading, and then Ulysses, which I use to write my actual scripts if I do not use Obsidian. I'm going to tell you how Apple Vision Pro's ultra-wide connection to my Macintosh is affecting that workflow and how I think that it is going to unlock new levels of productivity for me on this channel and in my other work. Let's jump right in. The first thing you'll be greeted with when you put on Apple Vision Pro is your traditional grid of apps. Now, what I usually do is I just open up my hand, pinch, and go home, and almost immediately I'm greeted with a connect button on top of my MacBook Pro. I can look and pinch to connect, and you'll notice that immediately I get my ultra-wide monitor and in the way that I had set it up before. It saves all of my preferences, it opens up immediately, and there's not too much that changes beyond opening it up to a wider display. Now, you'll notice I have up our schedule for the day, where I'll talk about Obsidian and then Ulysses. I'll give some thoughts about environment, and I'll have a little closing segment about Final Cut. But this is our schedule for the day, and I wanted to start with Obsidian and Zettelkasten. Now, Zettelkasten is a note-taking method, which I really encourage that you look into. It's based on the principle that you can create notes that work from the bottom up instead of the top down. Traditionally, when you write notes, you have to have categories at the very beginning, things like subjects or maybe projects. With Zettelkasten, it takes chaos and it allows you to build structure from the bottom up. Traditionally, this was done on index cards, and a core principle of Zettelkasten is to put notes into a format that is small enough to fit on an index card, and then to position notes one after another in a way that it forms connections. And in this case, with Obsidian, I do that using hyperlinks. And so because I work primarily in a creative space where I'm working to connect novel ideas, Zettelkasten lets me modularize my thoughts out and make connections in new and surprising ways that help me develop these videos and go from, as this says, chaos to creativity. And one of the most important tools that we'll get to for that is the graph, which I see most people question in Obsidian. So you'll notice over here in my stage manager, I have a group that has my Obsidian windows. And you can already see how this could affect the way that I use my note-taking system. You'll notice, as I said with my Zettelkasten, that most of my notes here are short, small, and have this link that I call my next link, where I can open up a new window here that has the next card in a series of thoughts that go on to the next one and to the next one. And I can follow these paths in and out of my notes in a way that lets me connect my ideas and form them in different ways. One of the ways that I really enjoy using my Zettelkasten is by following these links one after another and then closing ones that I don't think are necessary and reorganizing these in an order like they're cards on my desk. With the ultra-wide monitor, it unlocks a whole new ability for me to open up many of these little note cards and reorganize them in a way that I could not do on a smaller display. In fact, most of the time when I have it on my Mac's display, I end up running out of space and having to close a bunch of these tabs and lose some of my work, so to speak, in this reorganization because I just don't have enough screen real estate. So an ultra-wide monitor solves that beautifully, especially with Obsidian's stacked tabs mode, which is what you see here. So I'll usually follow these along, and if I want to add a new note, I'll go to the end and I'll say, well, we're going to go along, we're going to go over here, and maybe this is the one, oh yeah, I remember that I had a Odyssey from that completed in my iPad using a keyboard and mouse, and how that might affect the future of the Vision Pro. And I have this thing about a superhuman interface, but I really want to add a new note over here that talks about, will the magic cursor on Apple Vision Pro be a limiting factor for Mac Virtual Display and Ultrawide? I'll open up a new thing and I can begin taking my notes here. What you'll also notice is that I have my graph opened. Now, a lot of people, when it comes to Obsidian, sort of don't know how to use the graph and end up turning it off a lot of the time. It's usually seen as this thing that's kind of pretty looking. It is a interesting visual exercise, but I use it as a way to wayfind in the chaos of my Zettelkasten. Now, notice, because I'm organizing my notes in this way, again, I'm not putting in these folders, I'm just adding these next links and going on to the next one. You can see that it ends up being quite messy and things don't have a I can lose notes quite easily. And that's actually kind of the point. I don't have time to get into why that is important for Zettelkasten today, but suffice to say, if you take me at my word that that is a useful feature of Zettelkasten, the graph becomes that much more useful as I develop my ideas. Because what I can do is I can see over here that this new note that we just created about the magic cursor on the Apple Vision Pro and it being a limiting factor for Mac Virtual Display, it's connected to all of these other ideas about input fidelity and bandwidth and visual touch as a whole. And if I really want to see more, I can sort of increase the depth at which I can see it. And again, this is where the Apple Vision Pro's ultra-wide monitor really shines. I can have a giant sprawling graph where I'm seeing these disparate connections between the thing I just wrote and ideas like the graphical user interface, iPad OS versus Mac OS, and things like evolution from the iPad to computer keyboard and mouse over here, and how they connect. Oftentimes what I'll do, if I was writing about the magic cursor, I might want to talk about this evolution. And so I will go and open up a new tab over here and say, I'm going to open up that note that we just saw on my graph about evolution. And now the graph changes again, and we can see how these things start to form. This is how I operate on a day-to-day basis when I use my Zettelkasten as implemented in Obsidian. The graph is a hugely useful tool for me because I can see some of these notes that I might have forgotten about in the past, and I can continue to open them and reorganize them in the way that helps me start to put together ideas in new and interesting ways that gives me the real estate to have a giant desktop where these ideas can be laid out and be messy and give me the opportunity to be creative. Which brings me to the next phase of my video production process. In pre-production, I also like to go from messy to neat. Now, the messy part of my note-taking process is what you've just seen. Putting these very short-sighted connections between one note and another is not a very good way to organize things at a project level. In fact, a lot of times I find myself lost in the Zettelkasten and going down rabbit trails that I didn't necessarily know that I was going to go down. But it's a very productive way for me to keep myself writing and to sort of follow my instincts and to enter a state of flow and be more productive overall. Now, there comes a time where I have to focus that creative mess into an actual project. And the first step is what I just showed you, organizing these pieces into a particular order or a line of thought that I think might be useful for me to put together in a video. Now, like I said before, this is very temporary. It's kind of like professional RAM, right? This is like my desktop. This is my paper sprawled all out. But what I really want to do is I want to have a whole separate document. And sometimes the way that I will do that is I will open up a new tab over here without this. These are traditional tabs, you'll notice, and not stack tabs. And I'll create a new canvas. Now, the canvas is Obsidian's version of an infinite canvas like Freeform or Canva or some of these other infinite canvas tools. I think Figma does this too. What's great about it is that I can take notes from my vault, from my Zettelkasten, and place them and organize them on a infinite canvas in a way that is organized and clean. So whereas my graph helped me wayfind in the mess, Canvas helped me organize ideas in a way that makes sense in a video. So for example, if I'm making my video about the thing we were just writing about, which is this magic cursor, I might go ahead and find that in my vault and place it on my canvas. I can resize this, I can zoom out, I can make this full screen if I wanted to. But where this becomes very powerful is that I can go ahead and start to add all of these other notes where I was talking about it. Well, if I want to know about Magic Cursor being a limiting factor in Magic Virtual Display, what I probably want to know about is the evolution of the iPad as well. So I like that idea, and I'm going to go ahead and place that over here. Now, let's go ahead and add one more note over here. And I think I like the idea of Nilay talking about the keyboard and mouse being undefeated. And you can see that it's in my recent history here, so I can add that as well. And you can see that I can start to organize these ideas in a way that makes sense to me. This is what I tend to do. Sometimes what I will do is I will go ahead and add additional notes as well. And I might say something like, these ideas are connected in the way that they show how important a keyboard and mouse are for modern productivity as superhuman interfaces. And that actually reminds me, just beginning to write here reminds me of maybe the next card that I can add, which is about superhuman interfaces. So I'll go down here and we might talk about them amplifying human intent. And so you can start to see how these cards begin to form the skeleton of an outline that I might use for a video and a basis of knowledge that I use to kind of grow my ideas from individual little notes that come together in a graph into a permanent, stable document that I might use as either inspiration to continue writing or to directly operate from when I'm filming a video. Now, these canvas things I can name. I might call this Apple Vision Pro Magic. And this stays in my vault permanently saved as a document. And even if I close it, I can open it back up again if I type in AVP magic.canvas. Whereas these, if I start to close them, they're closed for good until I open them back up again. So that's how I use my Zettelkasten, and that's how Apple Vision Pro's Ultrawide is affecting the way that I can do it. Bottom line, more screen real estate is better, just like you would expect. Now, it gets even better when I start going through my research and reading process. A lot of times I'll have windows sprawled out here talking about Wikipedia research or YouTube videos or Readwise Reader where I do some of my reading, or ChatGPT or Matter for some of my other reading stuff. And what's great about this is that I can organize this and have space for still all of these things even when I have those research windows open. And so here you can see how much I can just fit on one display as a whole and how much it will allow me to cross-reference ideas, quickly grab things, and quickly move between applications in a way that I could have never done before on a smaller display. The final step here that I promised you I'd tell you about is my Ulysses. And Ulysses is just a traditional writing tool. It's something that is very good at kind of mimicking this idea of writing in smaller chunks, reorganizing them, and refactoring them in ways that you can't do in many other writing apps. It allows you to write in Markdown, which I love. And I think that there is a lot here that I could talk about just about this application. But long story short, the thing that I love about it is that it allows me to create my workspace in a way that encompasses the entirety of the process, from note-taking to organization to a clean script that I can use to start shooting my videos. And so we've talked about Zettelkasten, we've talked about chaos to creativity, we've talked about the graph, and we've talked about the canvas, and how Ulysses and my writing program shows how it can be used in conjunction with Obsidian to allow seamless multitasking in this broader Apple Vision Pro environment. Speaking of which, one of the things that I love to talk about when it comes to productivity is whether you have your ladder on the right wall. Sometimes your ladder is the right height to get on the roof, but if not up against the right wall to get on the roof that you want to get onto, what's the point in building a ladder in the first place? In this metaphor, this is the ladder. Now, when it comes to productivity, I think that one of the hardest things to achieve is not the right set of tools and the right layout and right usage of tools, because the reality is that your usage of these productivity tools is probably going to be very different than mine. But here's what I do believe, that in order to be productive, you need to have long, uninterrupted periods of focus that allow you to be immersed in your ideas and in your content, whether or not you have an immersive screen to be working out of. In this case, that focus for me comes when I put on my Apple Vision Pro. One of the things that I find when it comes to productivity is that the hardest thing is for me to get started. And I have found that one of the best ways to do that is to carve out spaces in my life where when I sit down, I begin to be productive. That's why I've set up my room with this desk right here. When I sit down here, I plan on being productive. Now, still, when I sit down with my Mac and I get to work, sometimes I find that I end up not necessarily getting to work in the way that I had expected. But I have found more and more with this display that when I put on my Apple Vision Pro as a Mac monitor, I'm immediately transported into a place, not only at my desk where I plan on working, but into an environment that feels immersive to me, where I almost always feel like I'm getting work done. I very rarely get distracted by my phone in here because it's hard to use my phone, frankly speaking. But more importantly, having the immersive environment of my actual Mac itself literally wrapping its way around me has allowed me to begin working and to keep working in a way that I have never felt before on any other device. Now, I don't think this is going to be true for everyone. This thing is heavy. It still has all of the trade-offs. It's expensive. It doesn't have as much flexibility as a set of monitors do in certain ways. And so I would not fault you for saying this setup doesn't work for me. But for me, putting myself in that headspace immediately once I put this thing on my head is worthwhile in its own right. With that being said, I want to show you one final thing, which is how I use Final Cut on this. Once I've gotten through pre-production and production, it's time to edit. I can pull my stuff in here and you can see how it greatly affects my ability to already have enough workspace for many more of my clips, for a more robust inspector, and for the viewport itself. Now, a major change in the Mac Virtual Display is that it allows me to route my Mac's audio almost with no lag through the audio pods in the headset itself, rather than play them through my MacBook's speakers, which is great. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, again, spare you the noise here of me skimming back and forth and seeing it. But you can already see how me seeing my entire timeline gives me that same ability that my Zettelkasten did before. Here's what's great. I have always felt very immersed by my editing process. I feel like I'm in a state of flow. But immediately when I throw this on, having my editing bay surround me in this way, and even if I make things a little smaller to my ultrawide, or from the ultrawide to the wide, I still end up with a much better, more immersive way to edit my videos that allows me the space to have things like my video scopes or other special editors that I use quite consistently while I record. So there you have it. This is how Mac Virtual Display is affecting my workflow, from Obsidian and my Zettelkasten, from reading to note-taking, from note-taking to organization, and from organization to writing, production, and finally, editing. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have questions about what other things you want to know about the Mac Virtual Display and the Apple Vision Pro, now is the time to ask me. So go ahead and ask in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.